November 28, 1944, 90 miles south of Tokyo Bay, the Pacific night stretched black and infinite as Commander Joseph F. Enright gripped the bridge rail of USS Archerfish, salt spray misting his face. At 34 years old, he carried the weight of redemption on his shoulders, a second chance that men like him rarely received in wartime. The submarine rolled gently beneath his boots, her diesel engines thrumming through the steel deck. Above, stars pierced the darkness like ice chips scattered across velvet. Enright's eyes swept the horizon through binoculars, scanning for targets that might never come. His crew of 81 officers and enlisted men had been on lifeguard duty for downed B-29 crews. Important work, certainly, but not the kind that sank enemy ships. Not the kind that earned you forgiveness for past failures. The memory still gnawed at him. 15 months earlier, commanding USS Dace, he'd tracked the Japanese carrier Shokaku, a prime target, a jewel in the Imperial Navy's crown. Intelligence had handed him the opportunity on a silver platter. But when the moment came, when Shokaku's massive hull loomed in his periscope crosshairs, something inside him had frozen. He'd made a timid approach, let daylight chase away his courage, abandoned the attack. Then another target, a tanker, and he'd been depth-charged into withdrawal. 49 days at sea, 0 results. I was responsible for an unproductive patrol and request to be relieved by an officer who can perform more satisfactorily. Those words had tasted like ashes when he'd written them. Admiral Lockwood had granted his request without hesitation, shuffling him off to administrative duties at Midway, the submarine service's version of purgatory. For 6 months, he'd pushed papers while other men hunted and killed. But somehow, impossibly, Lockwood had given him this second chance. Command of Archerfish in September of 44. The submarine had departed Pearl Harbor on October 30th, stopped at Saipan for repairs on November 9th, and now prowled these deadly waters south of Tokyo, where Japanese steel ruled the waves and American submarines played a lethal game of cat and mouse. At 20:48 hours, a voice cut through the bridge's quiet. Radar contact, bearing 030, range approximately 24,700 yards. Enright's pulse quickened. He ordered Archerfish to turn toward the contact. Engines cut to let the plotting party get a read on the target's movement. Minutes crawled past like hours as his crew worked the mathematics of interception. Then Archerfish surged forward, her engines pushing 18 knots, diesel exhausts streaming behind her like twin comets in the darkness. By 21:40 hours, Enright had visual confirmation through his binoculars. His breath caught. "Aircraft carrier," he called down to the conning tower. "Large. 3 destroyer escorts." What Enright couldn't know, what no American intelligence officer knew, was that he'd stumbled upon Shinano, the largest aircraft carrier ever built. She was a ghost ship, a secret wrapped in steel and silence. Her story had begun 4.5 years earlier, in May of 1940, when her keel was laid at Yokosuka Naval Arsenal as the 3rd Yamato-class battleship. Workers had labored behind tall fences that sealed off 3 sides of the graving dock. Photography was forbidden. Speaking about the ship outside the yard compound could mean punishment up to and including death. The Imperial Japanese Navy guarded Shinano's existence like a state secret because that's exactly what she was. Then came Midway, June of 42. 4 Japanese fleet carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soru, and Hiru, obliterated in a single day. The carrier force that had struck Pearl Harbor, that had dominated the Pacific for 6 months, shattered against American dive bombers. In the aftermath, with Shinano's hull only 45% complete, the Navy made its decision: convert her into an aircraft carrier. Vice Admiral Keiji Fukuda of the Naval Technical Department oversaw the transformation. What emerged was unlike any carrier in any fleet: 72,000 tons at full displacement, 872 feet long, 119 feet at her widest point. Armored like a battleship, 16-centimeter main belt, 95-millimeter flight deck, capable of withstanding 1,000-pound bombs. She bristled with 16 5-inch guns, 145 25mm anti-aircraft cannons, 12 rocket launchers, 4 steam turbines generating 150,000 shaft horsepower could push her to 27 knots. Her range? 10,000 nautical miles. But the Battle of the Philippine Sea in June of '44 changed everything. 2 more fleet carriers lost. American B-29 seconds, now striking from the Marianas, bringing fire from the sky down on Japanese cities. Suddenly, Shinano wasn't just important, she was desperate. Her completion date was moved up by months. The original deadline of April '45 became October '44. The shipyard couldn't increase its workforce. Pressure mounted. Quality suffered. When Shinano launched on October 8th, an accident marred the ceremony. A caisson in the dry dock, improperly ballasted to save time, lifted unexpectedly as water rose. The sudden inrush slammed the carrier forward into the dock's end, damaging her bow structure below the waterline. Some workers whispered of omens. Captain Toshio Abe, taking command, almost called her an unfinished aircraft carrier at the launching ceremony. She was commissioned on November 19, 1944, 10 days ago, with civilian workers still aboard, systems still incomplete, waterlight doors still unsealed. And now she was making her maiden voyage from Yokosuka to Kure for final outfitting, carrying 2,500 souls, 6 Shinyo attack boats, 50 Oka rocket aircraft, and the desperate hopes of an empire in collapse. Aboard Archerfish, Enright stared at the plotting table and felt his stomach sink. The carrier was zigzagging at 20 knots. Even when zigzagging reduced her effective speed to 17 or 18 knots, Archerfish could barely match it on the surface. And submarines didn't attack from the surface, they needed to get ahead, submerge, and fire from ambush. "All ahead flank," Enright ordered. "We're going to run this bastard down." For 6 hours, Archerfish chased Shinano through the black Pacific night. The submarine's diesels roared at maximum output, throwing spray across her bow as she pounded through the swells. Below, in the sweltering engine rooms, men stripped to the waist worked in temperatures that turned steel hot to the touch. Above, on the bridge, Enright and his lookouts kept their binoculars fixed on the massive shadow ahead, watching her zigzag back and forth across her base course. Lieutenant Dave Bunting hunched over the torpedo data computer in the conning tower, constantly updating solutions for course, speed, and range. Ensign Gordon Crosby's plotting party tracked every course change, trying to predict when the carrier might turn back into Archerfish's path. At 23:30 hours, Enright sent a contact message to Pearl Harbor. "Am pursuing large aircraft carrier." The message reached Vice Admiral Charles A. Lockwood at Comsubpac headquarters early the next morning. Lockwood and his operations officer immediately began plotting intercepts, ordering every submarine in the area to strategic blocking positions. But Enright didn't know if help would arrive in time. This was his fight, his chance. By 0241 on the morning of November 29th, 7 hours into the chase, that chance seemed to be slipping away. The carrier maintained her maddening zigzag, never quite giving Archerfish the position she needed. Then, at 0 to 300 hours, radar showed something beautiful. The target had changed course again, and this time, she'd turned directly toward the submarine. "She's coming at us," the radar operator called out. His voice carried equal parts excitement and disbelief. Enright didn't hesitate. "Take her down. Dive! Dive!" Section 4. The perfect shot. Archerfish tilted forward, her bow planes biting into the Pacific as she slid beneath the surface. Water rushed over her conning tower, then her bridge, until she leveled off at 60 feet. The diesel engines fell silent, replaced by the electric whisper of battery-powered motors. Lieutenant Tom Cousins, the diving officer, held her steady with the practiced touch of a surgeon. In the conning tower, Enright pressed his face to the periscope eyepiece. Shinano's massive silhouette filled his view. She was heading straight for them now, getting closer with every passing second. too close. "Come left 10 degrees," Enright ordered. He needed a small starboard angle on the bow, needed to give himself room to maneuver. At 3,500 yards, the fire control party had their solution locked. At 1,400 yards, Enright could see details on the carrier's island, could make out the shapes of men moving on her deck. A destroyer escort appeared in his peripheral vision, 500 yards off Archerfish's quarter, close enough to force them deeper if she turned their way. But she didn't. The escort passed, oblivious. "Flood the tubes," Enright said quietly. Then, the order that made several crewmen exchange confused glances. "Set torpedo depth at 10 feet. 10 feet was dangerously shallow. The torpedoes might run even shallower and miss completely, or break the surface and leave a wake. But Enright remembered a conversation from a year earlier with Rear Admiral Freeland Dauban. "Aim high," Dauban had told him. "Hold them above the waterline if you can. A carrier can't survive if she rolls over." At 0317 hours, with Shinano at 1,400 yards, Enright gave the order: Fire 1, Fire 2, Fire 3, Fire 4, Fire 5, Fire 6. 6 Mark 14 torpedoes leaped from Archerfish's bow tubes, their electric motors driving them through the dark water at 46 knots. Enright kept his eye pressed to the periscope, counting seconds, watching the massive carrier's flank grow larger in his view. At 0320, the first torpedo struck Shinano aft, just below the waterline. A geyser of white water erupted against her hull. 30 seconds later, wham, the second hit. Wham, the third. Wham, the fourth. 4 hits out of 6 tubes. Perfect. Through the periscope, Enright saw Shinano list to starboard. He'd hold her high on the hull, just as he'd intended, just where her incomplete watertight integrity couldn't save her. "Take her down," Enright ordered. 400 feet. Rig for depth charge. Rig for silent running. Archerfish dove like a stone, her crew scrambling to secure every loose item, to silence every unnecessary sound. They hit 400 feet and leveled off just as the first depth charge exploded overhead, a thunderclap of pressure that shook the submarine and sent instruments dancing on their mounts. Then another, and another. 14 depth charges in all, the closest exploding 30 yards away. Inside the steel tube of Archerfish, men held their breath and listened to destruction happening above them. For 47 minutes, the sounds came through the hull, the groaning of tortured metal, the rumble of bulkheads collapsing, the deep, hollow booms of internal explosions, breaking up noises, submariners called them, the sound of a ship dying. At 0405, the sound stopped. Aboard Shinano, the nightmare had begun the moment those torpedoes struck. The 4 explosions tore gaping wounds in her starboard side, flooding compartments with thousands of tons of seawater. The damage was catastrophic not because Shinano was poorly armored, but because she was incomplete. Her elaborate damage control systems weren't fully installed. Watertight doors stood open or couldn't be properly sealed. Pumps that should have been operational sat idle. The civilian workers who'd stayed aboard for the voyage had no combat training. Many of the crew members were inexperienced, pulled from various shore stations to fill out her complement. Captain Abe tried everything. His damage control teams fought the flooding for over 7 hours, but water cascaded into void after void, spreading through the ship's vast interior like a living thing. The carrier initially maintained way, but around 0 to 600 hours, she lost power. Her list to starboard grew steeper. Men struggled uphill across tilting decks, trying to reach their stations, trying to save their ship. Abe refused to abandon her. Even as Shinano rolled further to starboard, even as her flight deck tilted toward the water, he remained on the bridge, giving orders, hoping for a miracle that wouldn't come. At 10:57, on the morning of November 29th, 7.5 hours after the torpedoes struck, Shinano capsized and sank stern first, just off Inamba Island. She took Captain Abe with her, along with 1,435 sailors and civilian workers. The destroyer escorts managed to rescue 1,080 souls from the water. The largest warship ever sunk by a submarine had gone to the bottom on her maiden voyage. Archerfish surfaced at 0610 hours to find nothing but empty ocean. Enright sent his attack report to Pearl Harbor and continued his patrol. On December 9th, he spotted 2 destroyers and fired 4 torpedoes with no hits. On December 15th, after 48 days on station, Archerfish returned to Guam. That's when things got strange. The Office of Naval Intelligence reviewed Enright's sketches of the target he'd had the foresight to draw what he'd seen through the periscope and told him he'd sunk a cruiser, maybe a heavy cruiser. 28,000 tons. Probably a Hayataka-class carrier, if he was lucky. But not the massive carrier, he claimed. No such ship existed in that area. Intelligence didn't believe Japan had any carriers near Tokyo Bay. Enright had sketches. He had his crew's testimony. He had the breaking up noises they'd all heard for 47 minutes. But intelligence was skeptical. Give him credit for a carrier, they said eventually, but not the monster he described. For weeks, doubt gnawed at him. Had he really sunk what he thought he'd sunk? The war ground on. Archerfish went on her 6th patrol in January of 45, this time with Enright commanding Joe's Jugheads, a 3-submarine wolfpack with batfish and blackfish. They hunted the South China Sea off Hong Kong and Formosa, damaged another target, possibly sank a submarine in February. August 15th, 1945. Japan surrendered. In the aftermath, as American forces occupied the home islands and began sorting through captured documents, the truth began to emerge. Naval intelligence officers, combing through records at the Yokosuka Naval Arsenal, found construction logs, design specifications, survivor testimonies. The carrier that Enright had sunk wasn't 28,000 tons. It was 72,000 tons. It wasn't just any carrier, it was Shinano, the 3rd Yamato-class battleship converted into the largest aircraft carrier ever built. A ship so secret that the Americans hadn't even known it existed. When the confirmation reached Enright, it must have felt like vindication and disbelief in equal measure. He'd done more than redeem himself for his failure aboard Dace. He'd accomplished something unprecedented in submarine warfare history, sunk the largest warship ever destroyed by a submarine, before or since. The Navy awarded Archerfish the Presidential Unit Citation. Enright received the Navy Cross, the service's 2nd highest decoration for valor. His citation praised his extraordinary heroism and distinguished service during that 5th war patrol from October 30th to December 15th, 44. It described how he'd commenced an all-out pursuit, maneuvering his vessel at top speed to outdistance the zigzagging enemy aircraft carrier for 6 hours before expertly directing his ship in penetrating the escort screen to strike the target with 4 torpedoes and inflict severe damage, which later sank the carrier. On September 2nd, 1945, Archerfish was among 12 American submarines accorded the honor of standing by in Tokyo Bay as Japan signed the Instrument of Surrender aboard USS Missouri. Enright stood on his submarine's bridge and watched the ceremony that ended the war he'd nearly lost his career in, the war he'd redeemed himself in, the war where he'd written his name in naval history. The sinking of Shinano remains one of the most extraordinary achievements in submarine warfare. The sheer tonnage, 72,000 tons, dwarfed anything accomplished before or since. The strategic impact was immense. Japan lost not just a carrier, but a symbol of their remaining naval power, a ship that represented their last hope of rebuilding carrier aviation strength. For Enright, the rest of his career became almost anticlimactic. He commanded Submarine Division 31 from 49 to 50. He commanded USS Fulton from 53 to 54, Submarine Squadron 8 from 54 to 55. He served as Chief of Staff for the Submarine Force of the Atlantic Fleet from 55 to 57, commanded USS Boston from 59 to 63. He retired from the Navy on July 1, 1963, after 30 years of service. After retirement, he moved to Dover, Massachusetts, and worked on the Omega navigation program with Northrop Nortronics, later with Sanders Corporation, in Nashua, New Hampshire. In 1987, he published his memoir, Shinano, The Sinking of Japan's Secret Supership. When veterans of Archerfish visited him in late July of 2000, at the assisted living facility where he lived in Fairfax, Virginia, they brought gifts, an Archerfish ball cap, photographs, memories. They showed him the submarine's website on a computer. When the diving alarm klaxon sounded from the speakers, Captain Enright's eyes opened wide, his ears perked up, and the biggest smile crossed his face. They asked him how he'd felt after sinking Shinano. His answer came in a strong, firm voice. "Good! I felt good! We sunk the bastard!" 56 years hadn't diminished his memory or the emotion of that moment. Joseph Francis Enright died on July 20th, 2000, at age 89. He started his eternal patrol having transformed himself from a submarine commander who'd requested relief for failure into the man who accomplished what many consider the most significant single submarine sinking of World War II. They'd laughed when he claimed he'd sunk Japan's secret ship, but the truth had surfaced, just like Archerfish after that perfect attack. And now, decades later, his name remains forever linked with Shinano, two ghosts from the Pacific War, one who hunted and one who died, both written into history on that November night in '44, when 4 torpedoes found their mark and changed naval warfare forever.